Welcome, everybody. My name is Lynn Thomas. I am the head of the Rare Book and Manuscript Library, and I have the distinct pleasure of being the vague MC for this evening's program. I'm going to begin by reading our land acknowledgement statement for the university, and then I'm going to introduce both of our speakers, and then we're going to have a lovely Q&A discussion about the history of lesbian pulps and erotica. So I'm really looking forward to hearing the discussion. As a land-grant institution, the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign has a responsibility to acknowledge the historical context in which it exists. In order to remind ourselves and our community, we will begin this event with the following statement. The University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign sits on the lands of the Peoria, Kaskaskia, Piankashaw, Wea, Miami, Muscoughton, Odawa, Sauk, Meskwaki, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. It is necessary for us to acknowledge these Native nations and for us to work with them as we move forward as an institution. Over the next 150 years, we will be a vibrant community inclusive of all our differences, with Native peoples at the core of our efforts. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers. So I'm going to read the bios that they sent us, and then we'll get them sent off into a lively discussion. Anne Weldy, better known by her pen name Anne Bannon, is the author of a series of 5 lesbian pulp novels known as the Bebo Brinker Chronicles. Written from 1957 to 1962, the books were bestsellers when they were first released and have had remarkable longevity, especially for genre fiction. They've been published in 5 different editions and in several languages and are often taught in women's studies and LGBT studies courses. The book's popularity and impact have earned Anne Bannon the title of Queen of Lesbian Pulp Fiction, as well as numerous awards for pioneering gay and lesbian literature. A play based on her books has been produced twice in New York and now all over the country from Boston to Seattle. Cecilia Tan is an award-winning writer of science fiction and fantasy, romance, and erotica, and a 2010 inductee to the Saints and Sinners LGBT Writers Hall of Fame. Her books include Bent for Leather, Black Feathers, and the Magic University series, named by Autostraddle a, quote, trans-inclusive fantasy series for Harry Potter fans, end quote. Her short stories have appeared in Ms. Magazine, Asimov's Science Fiction, Absolute Magnitude, and Strange Horizons. Cecilia, and I'm going to mute myself and turn off my camera and keep an eye on the chat. Have fun.
We certainly will.
Thank you, Lynn.
Yes.
Anne, how are you?
Maybe I could start by asking Cecilia how you got started and why you chose science fiction.
How I got started. Okay, how I got started was I was writing erotic science fiction with some BDSM elements. In fact, it was long enough ago that we didn't call it BDSM then. We just called it SM then. And there was basically nowhere I could send it. All the science fiction publications had rules that said no erotica, and all the erotica publications had rules that said no science fiction. And it was like, why? I don't get it. Why? And so I had to start a publishing house myself at first. So I started a house called Circlet Press. And then as soon as I started publishing erotic science fiction, people went, oh, actually, maybe those two things can go together after all. And then, after that, I started selling my work to big publishers mostly. So, yeah, and a lot of gay and lesbian presses too, that suddenly became very open to it, and a lot of literary anthologies were like, oh, yes, we'd love a science fiction piece, or we'd love a more erotic piece, or, so I'm where a lot of things cross over. And I thought the main reason I was attracted to science fiction was that I found it easier to write about what we, in the 90s called alternative sexuality, because I could just make up my own sort of societal rules and, things like that. I could sort of divorce it from the mainstream political reality, and then people would be a little bit disarmed. Like, people wouldn't be as angry, if it was like, oh, this isn't happening in New York, in 1992. This is happening in, Planet X, on, whatever, that kind of a thing. And it just disarmed them enough that they would readers were a little more open to some of my, I don't know, maybe more outre ideas, because a lot of what I wrote about at the time was kind of taboo. So, um, yeah, yeah. I think one of the things you and I have in common is that we wrote a bunch of our foundational work basically when we were fresh out of college.
Yeah.
There's
For
that sort of period of life where you're just like trying to become yourself, right? And I think I became myself maybe a little more on the page at first than in my real life. And I think maybe it was a little bit going on for you too.
Yes, that captures it very well. I was eager to write. I didn't know how to get into print, and that mattered a lot to me. But I did write this book. This was the first of the books I wrote, Odd Girl Out, and it is all set in a sorority at the University of Illinois. So those of you who are loyal Illini, this is the one. And it was a tremendous success. But I was very lucky to have written a letter to the young woman who wrote the first original Lesbian Pulp paperback, named Mary Jane Meeker. This was her initial effort. You can see
Ring fire.
yeah, the same artist did the cover work. And she liked my letter, and she said, if you can get to New York, I'll introduce you to my editor. And she did, and he read my manuscript, which would not have happened otherwise. And he loved it, but he said, you've got two young women falling in love, and you've kind of put them in a corner and told another story. Put them in the middle of your story and come across, frankly, with what you're really interested in. And I did. And he said, if you do that, I will publish it. And he did. So that was wonderful. And that was how it got started. And these books were tremendously popular. And I think briefly, what got to people was there was nowhere to go for information.
Mm-hmm.
Anything about homosexuality, if you even inquired, suggested that you were not a good person, that you were probably gay yourself. That was an illegal identity.
Mm-hmm.
It was terrifying. You could, if you walked down the street holding hands with somebody of the same sex and the cops caught you, they could put you in the paddy wagon and take you downtown and fingerprint you. They could even put your name in the paper, and the next morning it would say, here you are, here's what you do, here's your address.
Yep.
You
Yep.
felt
Yep.
like a criminal. Yeah. So it was a scary time. Um, I think when you've been doing your writing, at least it wasn't quite that scary to approach that topic, but I'm interested to know
Yeah.
what got you going with this sort of ambiguous sexuality. It makes me think, what was the character that Ursula Le Guin created, The Left Hand of Darkness?
Yes.
That's
Yes. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
I,
Was it
yeah.
maybe an inspiration?
Well, I always had a kind of, I guess, I never fit into the boxes that, you're supposed to fit into. I was a tomboy as a child, but then growing up, I was never femme, really. I was always attracted to both men and women, but really I was attracted to people all across the gender spectrum. In fact, I'm most attracted to people who aren't somewhere obvious on the gender spectrum, kind of like myself. So, and then I was also interested in this sort of erotic power games and, that kind of a thing. And, in college, had no idea that there was actually a subcultural community, a BDSM community, that there were gay and lesbian communities within it, that there were, these other things. I didn't find all that till I graduated college and, sort of moved to the big city, right? But my fantasies were kind of coming out all over, right? In my stories. And I had that, the, the early 90s. So it was the early days of the internet, and I was meeting a lot of people online and at that time, who were like, yes, we do this. Yes, we get together. We have parties. We do this. They're mostly on the West Coast. And so of course for me, it was like research. I was just like, oh, really? Tell me about this. Tell me about that, and then that kind of information starts making it into my books. And then, like you said, people start taking your fiction as how to,
Mhm.
because there were a couple of how-to books that you could actually buy, but you had to go to the gay bookstore downtown to find them. There was no Amazon yet. There was no internet commerce yet, and so, yeah, it's like you had to find the store, be brave enough to walk in if you were not out, right? People were still in the closet at that time, and then to ask for it and to say, like, do you have, the master's handbook, or that kind of a thing, right? And so it was, yeah, people just started taking my stories as how to immediately. And I kept having to send people like people would, message you on the internet and be like, by the way, do you have advice about such and such? And, my advice was always like, I'm sorry, if you are having anal bleeding, call 911 immediately. Don't be emailing a stranger on the internet for advice, that kind of things. Fortunately, that only happened one time, but yeah, that kind of stuff. And just because people are so hungry for knowledge, when I think that's still true. It's like people are looking for, who can I trust in this world of misinformation? The internet has all the information in the world, but they want to hear it from somebody they feel connected to. And
Mhm.
that's a fictional person a lot of the time.
Well, so true. And it really resonates with my experience in the early 50s when, as you can imagine, so many young women were, desperate for information. And where do you go? I mean, if you went to the family doc, he was hot wired back to mom and dad.
Mm-hmm.
If you went to the minister or the rabbi or the priest, same problem. If you went to your family doctor, also, by the way, he would give you earnest information about how to get over it and that you would be okay as you grew up and matured. And you,
It's a phase. You'll grow
yeah,
out of it.
but he wouldn't explain what it was. And your favorite teacher, your advisor. So, and also you were very frightened of being reported uh,
Hmm.
to the authorities because it was a dangerous identity. So one of the things that I think kept the lesbian pulp paperbacks going as well as they did, totally ignored by the critics, no respectability. They were called sleaze. These
Hmm.
books
Hmm.
really were so cheap and made from, crappy paper, uh, not even glued, or not even stitched together, just glued.
Hmm.
And yet they were beloved, and they were available to this day in reprints. So the thing was, they told you something about who you were.
Hmm.
One of the fears of young women in those days was, I must be the only one.
Hmm.
Can
Hmm.
I talk to about this that can help me? And as I say, you had to cross everybody off the list. You had to look for books, and
Hmm.
there weren't any in respectable bookstores, except
Right.
very medicalized
Mm-hmm.
descriptions. So the lesbian pulp said this is how it is for young women who are together, who love each other, and it's a beautiful thing. They had to end in tragedy because the United States Congress was peeking over the back fence. And if you had a happy ending, you couldn't be, your books could not be delivered to the drugstore and the train
Hmm.
station and all the places where they were sold, because they sold them like magazines. And magazines were carefully monitored for salacious material.
Hmm.
So it was very, very tough. It was a minefield to navigate, but we were telling girls it's okay. And by the time I wrote Odd Girl Out, the rules had loosened a little bit. And I
Mm.
didn't have to throw my heroine under the bus. I put her on the bus and sent her to New York because there was Greenwich Village, all the big cities. There was the Castro in San Francisco. Chicago had a gay district, LA, New Orleans, a few of the big cities. And you could feel that you had a little community there. Um, and, and I think, excuse me, I think that really helped people. I know it saved lives. I have
Mm-hmm.
a beloved friend who's a wonderful writer herself, and she was on her way, literally in her hometown, to to jump off the bridge, and she stopped on the way for some little uh, liquid courage in a shop somewhere. And there was a row of books, paperbacks, science fiction, cops and robbers, westerns, all the
Mm-hmm.
genres. And there were the lesbian pulps, and she'd never seen them before. And the one she grabbed was Odd Girl Out. And it was a small book, and she sat down on a bench outside and read it. And her quote to me was, I went home and had dinner. I never jumped off the bridge. That saved her.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it grabs me every time I think about it.
Yep.
My little story that I was writing in the face of great opposition from a very proper husband whom I loved and had children with. It was it was difficult, but I think it was one of the most important reasons why the lesbian pulp fiction became a genre so important
Mhm.
to so many women. So I don't know if you've had any experience similar to that, but
I have from time to time had people really tell me that they discovered a side of themselves that they didn't know they had permission to explore until they inhabited a character of mine. And it was like reading actual nonfiction how to didn't do for them what inhabiting a story did. That inhabiting the story somehow opened their mind in a way that just looking at facts didn't. And I really feel like that's why fiction is so affecting. And it just, I mean, your friend couldn't jump off the bridge also because she probably had to find out what happened in the book. you know Odd Girl Out is so compelling. You start reading it and you just get sucked right into these folks' lives and you're just like, what is going to happen? You have to keep reading, right? And it's just, I don't know. I think one of the things that fascinates me the most about it, though, is that it sold what, 1 to 2 million copies? I mean,
yeah,
that's a large portion of the population of the United States in 1960. I mean, that's a lot of people. And every one of those copies is usually read by more than one person, right? Because it gets
yeah.
passed around among friends or, so forth and so on. So, like, that's a lot of people.
Mhm.
And I feel like I have gone through a similar thing, but it took till later in my career where first I was writing sort of, my weird form of sexuality for other people in the subculture. And then things happened like 50 Shades of Grey happened, and all of a sudden
Mhm.
everyone in the world was reading kinky fiction, and my fiction suddenly became mainstream. And so then I wrote a, mainstream romance series, like a heterosexual romance series, which I still am like, wow, I can't believe I actually managed to do that. Um, but it was so it's like, and that, it was sold in Target. It was, my mom's friends were taking pictures of it and sending her photos being like, I saw your daughter's book in Target, that kind of a thing. And just, I didn't think that was ever going to happen. That sort of pulp mainstream, I don't know, sort of impulse was going to come to my end of the subculture, but it
Right.
just goes to show that, there's um, and yeah, they publish it as, for the mainstream, right? As opposed to for the people who, by and for the people who wrote it. But then that you're reaching people through that, then that you wouldn't have reached, sort of just through a small press or through a lesbian press. So that that's been fascinating to me, just that whole process where it's like publishers suddenly decide, oh, you know what, we can make a pile of money on this thing that is otherwise, I don't know how they spin a wheel or something to figure out which subculture they're going to feature this year. I don't know. But it's like, okay, it was our turn, I guess.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. You're ignored by the critics and serious
Mhm,
commentators, but you're doing a wonderful thing. You're teaching. This is another way to be in the world and another uh,
mhm,
identity to inhabit. It was so important to the young women of my era, again, because there was nowhere else to turn. So I
mm,
think
mhm,
um, this did taught most of my books say something that's helpful to them in terms of the sociology of the time, what to
mhm,
wear, what to say,
mm,
which places to go to, so that if you get to a big city, you might find a community there
mm,
you could learn and grow and be who you really are without horrifying your grandmother and all the other uh, you know ancillary problems that came with this. At least you are writing in an era where you're not um, uh, you know people know what it is to be gay, and I think the time has passed when that is in any way an illegitimate
mm.
identity. So you don't have that burden to bear.
Here, here, knock wood. I know there are
Yeah. Oh, but
powers these days that would love us to crank back time to 1950, but and
well, uh,
I just got to think every time one of my books gets burned, an angel gets its wings or something, right? I just
wow. Yeah.
the because and okay, maybe they were going after my books, but now they're going after, YA books that just have a gay character. They or a
Mhm.
trans character. They just, and they're not reading the books, of course. They're just going by hearsay because they would never dare to actually read the book because then they might become tainted by the, I don't know, our subversive ideas, our subversive
So
ideas about our right to exist.
So I
Um,
felt that I was teaching, and you must feel now that you are too. I mean,
mhm,
giving people a way to be in the world, as we were saying, um, that might not have occurred to them, or that they wouldn't have had the
mhm,
courage to try. And I think also you're working off a sense of community.
mm,
We did not coalesced quite that well. We were each one separately in a little,
mm,
you
mhm.
know, what, a little attic somewhere writing,
Right.
um, and feeling quite isolated, and it was difficult to get acquainted with other people. Uh,
Mhm,
so that isn't there. But you've really invented an area of interest to people now that didn't exist before you sat down and started writing erotic science fiction. A little bit it would pop up, I do think, in
mhm.
when
Yeah.
and Catherine Forrest has written
Mhm,
some
mhm, mhm.
lovely stuff that is science fiction oriented. But I
Yeah.
think you really got it. And that's
Yeah.
one of the reasons
It
that
was interesting because I think if I hadn't done it, somebody was going to come and kick down
yeah,
that door
yeah,
between science fiction and erotica. Because now, I mean, like paranormal romance is one of the best-selling genres of romance. But it's in 1990, it was like that term didn't exist yet. Nobody was allowed to do that. There wasn't werewolf romance. There wasn't the fanfic that we have now. I mean, at the time there was a little bit of Kirk Spock, for example, and it was, you
yes,
know,
I saw some
that
of
stuff. And,
that.
and that
Yeah,
was very underground. It was,
fan
uh,
fiction.
fans who photocopied the stories and shared them amongst each other and, whatnot like that because it was pre-internet. And then I feel like once the internet comes along, it becomes so much easier to eventually, find your people, find other people who are interested in what you're interested in. And then, and especially if you're, young and full of hormones and you want to express your fantasies, right? It's like now, I mean, it's easy to project them onto uh a fictional character maybe that you already identify with. So I get people writing fanfic of my work now, and which blows my mind. I am just like, what, really? And it's fanfic is sort of it's a safe place where you can explore all different things, both your creative side, you're practicing writing and trying different voices and trying different things, and then also, you're trying on your sexuality, you're trying on your gender, you're trying on all different things, and it's in a way that you can't maybe just in the real world. In the real world, everyone wants you to kind of declare your labels the moment you step in the door, right?
Mhm.
I get people asking me all the time, what are your pronouns? And I'm like, that's a good question. I'm not sure how to answer that. So
Yeah,
I eventually adopted a line that Leslie Feinberg, the great butch lesbian writer, and transgender warrior,
right.
um, who said, my pronouns are not for me, my pronouns are for you. My pronouns are for you, your comfort, not mine.
Yeah.
I am we, I am the royal we, so um yeah, which I thought is just the best. I just found that in an old speech of Les Feinberg's, that's online recently, and was like, okay, all right, that's my answer now.
Yeah. My
Yeah,
Well, you know,
yeah,
one of the interesting questions is why did people choose to write for sleaze uh,
yeah.
publishers? And it's fair to say, I think, that they were very they have huge distribution. They paid very well. They
Mm-hmm.
gave me, when they accepted Odd Girl Out, they gave me a check for $2,500. And this is what they did for everybody. They were extremely choosy. Every
Mm-hmm.
week over the transom would come 400 unsolicited manuscripts from young writers all over the country, uh,
Wow.
among whom I would have been one had it not been for Mary Jane Meeker
Mm-hmm.
taking me by the hand and leading me to the editor-in-chief, who was an old movie guy. He knew a good story
Hmm.
when he saw one. That helped a lot. But I think it was the way these books were marketed was put the sleazy covers on them. I have several of them here, but not the really sleazy ones. Mine were rather prim by comparison. So it was that, it was the cheap production, it
Mm-hmm.
was the fact that they weren't distributed in respectable bookstores, and the name sleaze stuck to them. Now they're
Mm-hmm.
selling at book fairs. They've got uh, basic sleaze, they've got shocking sleaze, they've got and they're
Right.
all these nice old stories by wonderful writers like Ray Bradbury
Mm-hmm.
and Patricia Highsmith and
Right.
Barb Dahl and um,
Right.
but
Right.
but they liked it because they got those big checks. And that
Mm-hmm.
$500, I looked this up, that they gave you to get you started with
Mm-hmm.
royalties to come if after they'd made back their 2,500,
Right.
they sold. That money today would be worth $34,000. I, I looked it up. You
Mm-hmm.
were, if you were a kid down in Greenwich Village in those days, you could live on that with a roommate and a walk-up
Right. Mm-hmm.
apartment. You were set forever.
Yeah.
So,
Unfortunately, now you can't live in Greenwich Village on that
oh
money.
Lord, no!
$34,000 doesn't get you
It's
anything in Greenwich Village.
Millionaires Row. I used to
Oh,
work.
seriously.
Oh, I
Yeah.
would stay out all night. I'd walk around Washington
Mm-hmm.
Square unafraid till 4 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
then and it was all kids and a few artists, and
Mm-hmm.
it was only 10 years after World War II.
Yeah.
So things were still kind of shabby and quiet. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
anyway, I think that was a kind of fertile ground for what we were
Mm-hmm.
doing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I am struck by, I think one of the reasons why your books have lasted so well, though, is that they're so well written. I
Oh,
mean, and I know that there's a reason also why those 400 manuscripts that they were getting over the transom weren't all published. And I think you were right. You studied linguistics and languages in college, right? And what's a coincidence is that I also studied linguistics.
No kidding. Oh,
Yeah. And it's just I think you had a way with language. You had an eye for detail
I
that
thought we were going
as
to be the odd couple, but now we have something in common.
yeah, really. Well, and the thing that was funny is I wanted to study something that was kind of related to language, but I knew I didn't want to go to the English department who were going to tell me you can't write science fiction, you can't write, whatever, you have to write literature. And I'm like, I am writing literature as far as I'm concerned. It's just you probably don't consider it that, right? So, yeah. So because I always knew I wanted to write science fiction. I always knew that I wanted to go that direction because my imagination knew no bounds, kind of. So, and yeah, Ursula K. Le Guin, Samuel Delany, Marion Zimmer Bradley, those are the people that I was
Okay.
reading when I was growing up. And there's a lot of gender subversion and, whatnot in their work. So it was just, yeah, I knew that's sort of where I wanted to go, right? I knew I wanted to do that sort of thing.
Mhm.
I just didn't realize until I got out of college that, oh, but it has to be erotic because that's where like my muse is,
Mhm.
that I have to be uncovering these areas of, taboo sexuality or, that's what makes my imagination tick, right? So, yeah, so that's just the direction I went. And it's interesting how, though, we did both go through this process of when we started writing, a lot of our themes were taboo and then they became more accepted in the mainstream. I
Mhm.
mean, now post 50 Shades of Grey, I mean, you can buy sex toys in Target.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, I'm still tickled by that. I'm still very, very tickled by that. But it's, one of those things where at the time though, it was not so accepted. And my community has gone through some similar things, where like it's not illegal to be kinky, but it is still illegal to, for example, to spank someone. Like that's considered assault.
Oh, is
And
that still illegal?
oh yeah. And the police are not bothering us very much anymore because they've been made so much fun of for doing it. But we
Mhm.
had a big thing went down here in Massachusetts in the early 2000s where the police broke up a party, that was sort of taking place in a warehouse space, that they had rented. And um I think they thought they were going to find a rave, and what they found was a whole bunch of couples spanking each other, basically, like consenting adults, so forth and so on. And they ended up arresting two women, one of whom was spanking the other with a wooden spoon. Okay. And so they charged her with assault with a dangerous weapon. And then they charged the woman who was getting spanked with being an accessory to the assault, to her own assault. Um, right. And it's
Yeah.
patently ridiculous, right? And we had people who are like mailing their wooden spoons to the police department saying, "Oh, I'm surrendering my dangerous weapons," and everything. I mean, it was that ridiculous. But yeah, you can, if you want to focus, you want to Google Paddleboro, because this all took place in Attleboro, Massachusetts, and so we called it the Paddleboro case. And local activists raised money for the legal defense of the people. But then they dragged it out and dragged it out, where like every month they would get back in court and they'd be like, we need another month of discovery, or we need another month of whatever. And I think cost $20,000 to defend them into up to the point where then they finally dropped the case. But they did all the things that they used to do when they would raid a gay bar. They separated everyone, took everyone's driver's licenses so you couldn't leave, and then like interrogated each person separately. There it goes, the Attleboro Sun Chronicle, yeah, and which is all stuff that now is known by activists to be it's illegal, right? You can't just detain people because you feel like it, right? There were no drugs, there was no actual, you know, illegal activity going on, except that technically it is illegal to hit someone else, right? So, but yeah, since then they haven't really been breaking up parties like they did, in the 90s and early 2000s, because it was becoming so ridiculous. But
It sounds so medieval, and
doesn't it though? It's just
you
like,
wonder when we are finally, there's a true story that happened about 20 years ago of a pair of boy penguins. And some female penguin, remember this?
mhm.
Laid an egg,
Right.
want her egg, strolled off to have fun with
Uh-huh.
the other guys. And the two boys had been a pair and they went over and adopted the egg
Uh-huh.
and they did everything right. They took turns sitting on it.
Mm-hmm.
They took turns, each feeding the other. And when the baby was born, they babysat and they
Mm-hmm.
watched while it played with
Yep.
the little penguins. And finally people are sort of figuring out that this is going on in the mammalian world where
Right.
look, buffaloes to
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
cats. And
Right.
there's
Right.
nobody
Exactly.
else. And you think of all those kids during World War II, 5,000 young guys on a troop ship. This is where the paperback rage got going. They had to have something to do and they were trying to
Right.
give them something healthy, as they assumed.
Right. Right. Right.
And so in snuck the lesbian pulps and a few gay pulps. And, you wonder, why do people go back that far to the
Mm-hmm.
middle of the last century
Mm-hmm.
to see
Mm-hmm.
what we were writing? Was it just to laugh at us or, dismiss us as irrelevant? No, I think they get there and they realize,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, some of it's outdated. Nobody's wearing chinos or the kind of chinos, the chino
Mm-hmm.
skirts and stuff, but people are human. And if
Yeah.
humanity comes through in the reality of those feelings, the
Yeah.
terror, and it was genuine terror that you were going to lose
Mm-hmm.
everything that you had worked so hard for, as many fine people did. People who were working for the government, because the fear was they were subjected to,
Mm-hmm.
could easily be blackmailed,
Mm-hmm.
and
Right.
heaven
Right.
forbid that should happen to a guy with government information.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's just how different is it to fall in love 70 years after that? Or was it 70 years before? It's sort of a perdurably beautiful, thrilling
Mm-hmm.
thing. And if you can capture that on any planet with anybody of any sexuality, you've got
Mm-hmm.
a good thing, and it will show its value as the years go by. I that's what I can't account for why am I sitting here? Why are my
Mm-hmm.
books read? Um,
Yeah.
there's
Well,
going to be, more done with them on stage and stuff.
mhm,
Oh, and that will happen to you, I'm sure. Brace yourself.
maybe
That's kind of
I can hope.
crazy.
I can wish. Yeah.
Oh,
I
it would
think
be
there's something going on though. So I went and got an MFA eventually.
oh
Um,
good.
and at one point I was working a day job in publishing, and then the easiest way to quit a day job in publishing is to say, "Oh, I'm going to continue my studies." And so I went to grad school for writing, and you know, again, mostly
Smile.
literature with a capital L, but there was a lot of talk about sort of what makes a great American novel. And one of my professors basically said the difference between the great American novel and novels elsewhere is that the great American novel always has to have an outsider as the main character, or it involves the lives of outsiders and
Mhm.
people who are forcibly separated from disappearing into the mainstream, and that's why they make good protagonists, as opposed to, you know, them being about, I don't know, princes and, you know, like Shakespeare's got a lot of, you know, kings and whatnot as his main characters, you know, and whatnot. And it's like that's different from American, essentially mid-century, 20th century American literature. And I think it's true. I mean, and not just your books, but Ray Bradbury and Patricia Highsmith and, you know, whatnot, that there's this enduring quality to, you know, reading the outsider experience, because everyone experiences some form of alienation in their lives, and then to find it sort of manifest in and find yourself inside someone else's is, you know, is a really powerful thing. I mean, it relieves loneliness. You know, there's a way in which books are therapy, right? That
Mhm.
you know, you find out things about yourself as you go through this experience with this character, you know, whoever they are. So, um, and
And you
what's
come
funny is
back.
when I first heard this in my MFA program, I said, no, 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 that's not right. But now I actually kind of ascribe to it. You know, at the time I was like, this professor doesn't know what he's talking about. But now I'm like, you know, actually, I do write all these outsider characters. That's what I do.
Oh, exactly. Yes, it's wonderful, and it's going to be interesting for you when you're in your 90s to look back and watch people's
Mhm.
reaction to these books. But I think they have a life.
Mhm.
It's going to be
They
uh,
do.
you're going to have this sort of experience because you have things to say that nobody said before.
Mm.
That's kind of part of it.
Mhm.
Um, and we're all dreaming about going to Mars and
Uh-huh.
settling on the moon.
Right.
You know,
Right. Right.
our neighbors, that's where you start. So
Mhm. Mhm.
it's going to be relevant. It inspires the kids
Mm.
who will build the spaceships that can do that.
I hope so. I
And
hope
they will
so.
be of every conceivable sexuality.
Right.
So
And I would say then there will be queer people no matter what planet we're on. So,
yeah, yeah,
I'm wondering if you would tell us a little bit about what it was like. There was this renaissance of your books in the 80s, right? When
yeah.
Barbara Greer at Naiad Press kind of republished them specifically for a lesbian audience. At that time we had a very vibrant, gay and lesbian bookstore network throughout the US and Canada. We had our own newspapers. We had, there was a lot going on at that time. And, because I ran a small press called Circlet Press, I knew Barbara pretty well. We were always at book fairs together and she used to organize a gay and lesbian row of publishers at the big Book Expo America at the American Booksellers Association convention. She was the one who was in charge of putting us all in one place. And every year they would try to take that whole row and put us behind a column in the back, and she would have to fight, and be like, I've been doing this for how many years, blah, 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 and all that kind of thing. And, we don't deserve to be behind a column in the back, whatever. But that homophobia was so strong in the industry that they were like, well, if you're going to group all the queer publishers together, it just made it easier for them to stick us in the back. And one year we said, well, let's see what happens if we split up and everybody goes everywhere else. But then it wasn't as much fun. You know, it was like everybody was scattered all over, but it was like we didn't then have our own little neighborhood in the book business. So, but yeah, talk a little bit about that time in
Well,
the 80s.
yes, even good old Barnes Noble and Borders and respectable bookstores would put all the gay books on a little shelf all together, uh,
Hmm.
and it would always be in the back by the door to the ladies' room. And I used to be furious, and I would say to them, "Please, this is so silly. Put them up front. People like this stuff. They will buy it. Nobody, the guys don't want to be back there." And that brings up another issue, really, about why men buy these books. But yeah, so you do have to fight. And Barbara was a good fighter.
Hmm.
Yeah, one of the reasons that the covers were mine were never really sleazy, but they weren't very respectable either.
Hmm.
And the reason that was done, to the annoyance of many, many, many women, was the fact that they knew the women would find these books and would buy them and would love them and would, even if they had to hide them under the
Hmm.
mattress or
Right.
behind, you
Right.
know, fridge or wherever,
Hmm.
they would buy them, read them, share them. But the guys represented an enormous audience. And
Hmm.
everybody knows that this male fascination with two women together
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
having a wonderful time. Oh my God. It's carved on the walls of caves in Norway, literally.
Uh-huh.
It was on signs when you were walking into ancient Athens. Come see the ladies at Madame Sophie's and
Hmm.
or whatever, and they did, and so they made these covers for the men because they
Hmm.
knew that they'd fly
Right.
off the shelves,
Right. Right.
and they did. I think women regarded this with very mixed feelings, but the one good thing was, as a purely um, economic issue, it kept the books on the shelves available for purchase,
Hmm.
and they were a major part of the audience. And the men, of course, were writing some gay paperbacks of their own, but they always had a tougher, longer row to hoe. And because the women attracted both sides. Although I must say, it was interesting to watch. You were mentioning Spock and Kirk and Spock.
Yeah.
The fan fiction illustrated of those two guys together. I mean, it's amazing what if you turn people loose and don't drive them nuts with the cops peeking over their what interesting stuff they come up with. And
Yep.
it should not be discouraged, even if you disapprove. Thus saith Anne Bannon.
Oh, so true, so true.
So at this point, we're at just about 10 minutes before the hour, and we're trying to be mindful of Anne and Cecilia's time and energy this evening. So this is the point where we're going to pause. And if you have questions for Anne and Cecilia, please feel free to put them in the chat. You can also put them in the Q&A listing, and I will attempt to read them to everybody and get some answers.
I had another question for Anne, actually, though. So I know that a lot of people are like, well, you take what you want in real life and then you make it into a fantasy, right? It's like you had attractions to, butch sorority sisters that you didn't actually, approach in your real life, but then, you had your characters doing it in, in fiction. And I did this, similar things, right? Where I took my fantasies about, certain kinds of, I don't know, even erotic actions that I wouldn't necessarily feel were safe to do in real life, but in my fantasies, I can do them. But I feel like sometimes it works the other way, where you write something in your fictional universe and it manifests into reality. Has that ever happened with you? You feel like you wrote about something and then it came true?
Um, I guess I could say that when I thought of the character Bebo Brinker, who has come to characterize a lot of the books I wrote, um, I couldn't I couldn't do her in real life until I saw a remarkable young woman who embodied her, and and then I got the name partly from an old childhood friend, partly I made up, and it fit. And
Mm,
suddenly Abibo was walking around Greenwich Village, and I would be down there looking, almost literally looking for her. She's got to be somewhere.
mhm.
Where did I see that other woman? That's sort of a limited um, way of looking at it, but it was very powerful to me at the time. I was standing on a rooftop, on a penthouse rooftop up near Columbia University on the west side of Manhattan.
Mm,
And you're way up, it's a very high level, and you're looking all the way down that beautiful uh, island at night with the lights on. And you could sort of see where the village is. And it was like
mm,
calling to me, and I couldn't break loose at that time from my more conventional life. I had done what so many young women men have done, which was, what are you going to do with your life? You have to be a librarian, a nurse, a teacher. And if those
mm.
didn't appeal, where are you going to go? Who are you going to be? And so many of us got married while we thought, well, we'll figure it out. And eventually, if you're lucky, you do. But um, yeah, I think I've had that feeling of almost deja vu. I've been there before. I've seen
Mm,
that person, and
mhm.
maybe this is going to happen. You never know.
So we do have some questions from the audience, and they're in our Q&A section, so I'm just going to read them. We have two questions that are very similar, so I'm going to smush them together. One is from an anonymous attendee, and one is from someone named Erica. So could each of you please tell us which of We're going to ask you to choose amongst your children. Which of your novels is the favorite of yours that you've written? And can you recommend a book that you've read that had a major impact on you?
Hmm.
Well, I have to give credit to Mary Jane Meeker writing as Finn Packer uh, when she wrote Spring Fire. I pulled this book off the shelves and read it, and it wasn't the most wonderful book I ever read. It had a tragic ending that should embarrassed her to the end of her life. Um, but it said to me, "You can do this. You've had these experiences. You know what this is like. You can you can do this." So while my husband was at work, I set up his typewriter on the dining room table and I put a piece of paper in it and I launched. And I just kept going and I thought, don't give up, don't get discouraged, tell this story. She did it, you can do it. It's a similar story. When we met, we discovered we were nice girls from nice families. We had siblings, but they were all brothers. We both went to Big Ten schools. We both wanted to write. We were both wildly ambitious. And, you know, here she became an icon she was very controversial, but that's because she had an awful lot of guts and took an awful lot of pills in the days when that was supposed to be fun. And so she took me by the hand. She led me all over Greenwich Village. She showed me all of the lesbian bars. We talked to everybody. I met a lot of wonderful people. It kind of rooted me in that community as it was becoming. I won't say it was the best book I ever read, but she was a good writer. And it was a, a probably the most influential because I had no glimmer of how you just walk into a publisher's office with, you know, the first thing my editor said to me the day I met him was, "That thing weighs too much. Go home and put it on a diet." You know, it was a paperback publisher. It was gold
Right.
medal books. So I did, but I would say, yeah, that I have to give the credit to Mary Jane for giving me a kick in the pants and showing me the ropes.
Hmm. I was just looking for one of my children, and of course, it's the book that I can't find on the shelf that I'm gonna say.
Oh,
I mean, I can't pick among them, but I'm gonna say today The Velderet, which was really my first novel length sort of erotic story. And it's got gay characters, straight characters, characters who change gender. You know, it takes place on a faraway planet. And it's a political commentary at the same time. And and the reason it's called The Velderet, which is like this fictional kind of VR brothel that you can go to in the story, is that's a reference to Ray Bradbury's The Velt,
oh,
which is, you know, one of his
yeah.
classic stories about a sort of, you know, if you haven't read it, you can go find it. Which we read like in a great books program when I was in fourth grade, I think. And yeah, Ray Bradbury was probably one of my big early influences. And Roger Zelazny was also in there, and Ursula Le Guin, of course.
Mhm.
Um, and but then you know, as I was, you know, got out of college, walked into a gay bookstore for the very first time, and one of the very first books I bought was Pat Califia's Macho Sluts,
Ah,
which is all lesbian sort of BDSM short stories, and you know, and Patrick is still, you know, an
yeah,
influence in some
yeah.
ways. So yeah. I mean, so it's hard to narrow it down to, you know, just one, right? But because I contain multitudes. But yeah, that's what I'll say. The Velderet, which is in print still, you can still get it. It's an audiobook as well. Um, yeah, and
And I
yeah.
don't think I quite answered the question of which one of my own books, but that would probably be Bebo Brinker.
Mm.
Okay. Thank you. So we have time, I think, for one more question.
Okay.
So we've got one that is looking forward. So how do you both feel about the future of lesbian erotica and the queer erotica landscape?
Well, I think it's in good hands with Cecilia. I really do. I have great faith in the young writers. They have courage. They have a broad horizon. They can go exploring a lot of things that we didn't dare talk about. They've got such a lively imagination and a whole different take in many ways. The eternal truths are still there, you know, the human nature and emotion, but they handle that very well. And everything I've been looking at lately gives me promise and a sense of hope.
Hmm. I think the genie's not going back into the bottle. That no matter how much they want to turn back time, no matter how many books they burn, no matter how many books they ban from libraries,
Uh-huh.
schools, I mean, what's going on right now is fairly ridiculous, but we live in a global culture now, global literary culture where, on the internet you can, especially if you are writing or reading in English, you can find so much that is there that can't be kept from you, that you can get right onto your phone. That, we're not going back into the closet. We're not going back into, you know, yeah, a there's always going to be some sexual repression going on because people always want to make rules about how you can sex and how you cannot sex. Um, and those rules will just keep changing maybe, but I think definitely yeah, the genie's not going back into the bottle. And so, please, everyone out there, keep writing your erotic stories, whether they're for publication or for fanfic or just for your own selves, because it's, I think, just one of the best things you can do, and it's good for you, it's healthy. Exercise that imagination, and yeah, and it makes you stronger for the things that are going to come at you in your life later.
Alrighty, so at this point, it's time to wrap up. I'm sorry that we have to wrap up because I really think that we could go for another 2 hours or so and be entertaining to ourselves and to everyone who's in attendance. But I want to just thank you both, Cecilia and Anne, for taking the time to do this, to have this conversation, to share your history and your experiences with us. And I want to thank everybody for coming. I also want to note that, as you've probably noticed, this has been recorded, and it'll take a week or two, but the recording of this will go up on the RBML YouTube channel. So if you know folks who have missed it, or if you want to watch it again, you will have that opportunity. So thank you all so much. We really, really appreciate you taking the time to attend this.
It was a pleasure, Lynn. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.